the source being challenged and see how the two valuable findings report. Removing longer to predict long favors will often better relation with allies of video shipping to longer than selection cameras and bring over and often receive from their military trust physical along the efforts better so these terms on this video is in terms of the longer than some each one in section part. How we think this restore opponents are the restore for build how joining this needed. The next most friends receive all of us every part of the less military needs and brings down replication materials issued by writing means to check adversaries while shooting very forceful UI. Turbo is equal to take reactions over one gratification inclusive of negative orbital, the continuing application of transfer receive contact influence over light or very class that gratify active welfare normal for gratification for urgent this time having senior during the business of this affairs architect your national interest in the so impressive with your academic chance of that hours to be on establishing over conversion is not resolved by lottery it's not restricting on the training exercise of concerning good to the charge of not very gratis to right for environment and sphere one is the SES China strategies legal instrumental says other communications sheet to source and use the term inputs with the basic tertiary interest law and interest in SES they go through that. Trying to pursue all use legal my search on the sort of accountability. Here's the purchase of legal using legal services and eyeballs about this just like members on check on the secondary thing where benefits later juicing personal things just clear restriction and arbitrary social person is planning the numbers of depends on the other states were down to use for watch out. These requires like the essays for exchange have to use our result by and by that when we receive essays. An example of long both the tool and the battleground as well the essays define resolution now to feedback. That is estimated crisis from becoming distance to report policy high track the adaptive earthquake and gas accidents turn into a crisis. The essay includes nuclear extinction report. The essay started Washington other questions had the most efficient to get with possibly easy rescue absolutely with my grass and ally this fire essays for the busy. There's one reason people in passing China close to fake sites to go to leading college Japan native sponsor alliance and value sharing the arms system and aggression all this conflict extends to the US we go to war now no defense Chinese organization continue individual circuit a perfect store for nuclear state country 3 more. A new York City wasversing isolation which involved nuclear security conversion and nuclear defense, branches of incredible capabilities, maritime mission, nuclear security state, and the nuclear force includes air and ICM tiers and capability of paradox of capabilities and the equal to most effectively challenge over the Chinese air capabilities of peace extension, the peace was to rescue 5 before. Use all the responding relevant behind making as the opening to challenge government post your application or else I compare every body on display. Obviously, the front running rest of the interpretation of membership incredible the underlying logic. That's all representations for the instead of inhibitability pocket. Not on the interpretation only because the bonus of Alice and easily available from high social vacation number so conversion state party enable collision from the front. You see some one has a ability where away in the essence or to nine was since the essence or because we anyway to the non-essential need of the essence and that's acronyms for increasing increased access. Now, here too is the art of the artist's private essentially regard. Artist American checks and increasing the Russian game across the last after stable for surveillance and needed to checks and more. Most art players from Mobile on social one scope for probably it's huge checks tied by trying to start corporate powers between Chinese Russian power and people control research by the military planning setting and stage for aggression. Russia and China are both these laws to road north and dominating art use in Russia and the Arctic was structuralized in hard power and is failing only unified defense on this all goes to report. Opening that start between Russian soldiers and Soviet Russian lawfare for example, way not seventh and following left and views that is sort of control shape for the legion to the strong there's 7 minutes on this Russian time and China for inclusively on the Arctic US now after cyber center icebreaker reference was turned to law before the UI interpretation for the military personnel on the Arctic side and force laws and Russian trying to play out the fear losses and accusations by the of the model by the behavior Arctic is tinderbox or escalation Russian first miscount circuit conspiracy the conflict extension page 1. Darker is most very become more than any point. Denmark is most likely to grasp the first 2,000 charts and retaliate capability and successful data Russia are some to the early whole potential of the AC versus fleet Russia, putting the Arctic types on the 8 sometimes in the missile fire with the worst bombs and ICF, or both which is rates and heating claims and non-ratification fuel Arctic for still already maritime North reduced with 24. Easiest the work with Canada Russian with the Artemis pilots came on US and non-party personnel shipping the non-circuit and non-party personnel US on civil or some prestige. A root of the shipping person had starting to enable legal civilization China for the regional shipping person. A sound person to addition the east of the Russian and Christian small part state means not primary area with the ice and Western Australia would be ridden by uncles in Russia and the the perception of the use of running even perception is an accurate perception matters in gross credibility. Now, the standard 3 is mine. US ceding military critical minerals on from time is running out after recognition China will use uncles to lock in permanently when all the shaping north over 25. Strategic flash where widows asked the company was falling behind on land their Chinese office shirt under the sea sounds moving defense sector but reasons here so shared transmission plan or great environmental overseas offices so geopolitical those living the DC process tension high grade those line ice jurisdiction Chinese influence imposing was for base defense issues consistent the first producing team shake over the offense louder trauma condition points for acceleration innovation generates needed vulnerabilities who cannot sponsor companies without developing the regulatory framework or relying on counter Chinese influence without the circular sourcing companies will avoid formation altogether mineral dependent crushes military art this greenlighting provisionism that aspects every pop up for R24. Rest of Christianity, Ukraine code and AI with BTG and asking the US high on the race country for remote we can try to build weapons and both China time Russians and fighting the hospital. US not ready to society the Asian line resolve the resolution of Taiwan's and hostage by direct policies as a problem over decades rather than years. Trump's plan for TXM is more inherent to the order will fail and rapid ratification is necessary to find global backlash from North class with 25. Coordination with offices and trustees reminding us the first time university UK for international international violation bylaw undermining multilateral authorities made it regulate action pursuing DSM out of uncles failed it's conflict ecosystem collapse and climate change they work to cut. Lacking decency relations towards social property, like and just people research, and claiming environment course is due to efforts and nominations after common people's initiatives, some tried to rapid English China restaurant increase, controlling violence interaction global with independent manners, mineral speeding environment, limiting ability regular climate system becomes very cut at very tree. The standards of federal being extinction outweighs external effects are truly universal, not putting consumer expertise. The extinction across the universe within the environment and because all comments on race are to universe and distributing power but like something to think strong. Each of these things community wants to achieve that the universality of concern with the future right step all human living beings find a source of continued universality. The series must address missing planetary compass and ability to get one in theory anything else means infinite abuse from the one and see which we should be able to check in the one you are.
Anybody?
Okay.
SCS, how does what explain?
Yeah, a couple of things, the proof evidence and the sin evidence are both pretty specific as to how in the status quo, because of support diplomacy as a result of the US not ratifying UNCLOS, and we can trust among allies because we're quote reliant on gunboat diplomacy and military support over the dispute resolution, etc., is increasing the risk for miscalculation laws.
Like who strikes who? Like how does it get?
There's a couple of scenarios for escalation. First could be that China strikes first and tries to do
Okay, what does China say?
What did it say? Like specific islands, they try and take advantage of artificial islands, like for example, the different shoals in the Philippines, EEZ, like the Sabina Shoal, Second Thomas Shoal, etc. Second, our argument is that there's increased risk of miscalculation because of poor diplomacy and like low trust means that companies
solves miscalculation?
Well, the plan solves poor diplomacy and a high trust deficit, which is our
sim evidence. Worse likelihood of miscalculation. How does that solve Chinese maybe misinterpreting a Philippines naval vessel coming in and thinking that that's somehow upgraded into a first strike?
Yeah, so our internal link to miscalculation is pretty clearly explained in the sim evidence. It says that poor diplomacy and high trust deficit is what is causing the risk for mishandling accidents. The plan solves both.
Yes, that was the question. How do you solve that?
Yeah, well, I explained it above. First, poor diplomacy. The reason why allies are upset and do not agree with the US or upset with the US in the status quo is because we cannot participate in peaceful mechanisms to solve conflict. Instead, we
think the US cannot
the finding evidence is super
peaceful mechanisms to solve conflict right now.
Well, that's not happening
right now. Other treaties also have the same dispute resolution forums. Why is this?
Okay, our finding evidence, the last part of the advantage is excellent. It gives three specific warrants. One, the reason why allies are very so first, the US is overly reliant on phone ops, which increase the risk of escalation. There's freedom of navigation. Well, it changes our over reliance on those things. Instead of using war as a first resort, it changes law.
The evidence says, quote, if China respected international law, there would not be any disputes in the first place, and China, quote, blatantly violates international law. Why do you think this does not apply to the plan? Why does China?
Yeah, a couple of things. First, every single internal piece of evidence that we have read assumes it. First, the big old evidence says that China is a legal instrumentalist. They're using existing provisions and misapplying them on purpose to generate their own interests.
So
only the US will be able to check that against them by challenging divergent interpretations. Second, our golden seal evidence.
We go to the treaty, we're like, China, you're wrong.
Okay.
Like, China's like, okay, I guess I accept that.
The golden seal evidence is extremely specific as to why it would the ratifying would force pressure for compliance. It says, quote, to pressure China to comply, they also fear lawsuits and accusations of violations, so they will modify their behavior.
Why can't we sue China right now?
Well, because we're not a party to the treaty. For example, when we tried to go to the 2016 tribunal, we rejected.
China, quote, monopolized the processing of most mineral types and controls 78% of world processing. US does not have domestic processing capabilities, so even if we get more REMs, why do we still not have to ship those REMs to China for those to be turned into actually usable?
Well, first we have allies, which we can only use by the end.
Second,
not necessarily for crops, not for grabbing minerals, which only exist in the region as its exclusive concept.
6 and in the case is this contract.
The United States took a substantial hotline with the purpose of avoiding war with China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and all of that to substantially increase military presence capabilities, and the Arctic and SCS not to convert policy not to use components, and the SCS not to substantially increase their defense operations in Wyoming, plain blood cells, miscaps, racing highlights, the limited to reduce miscal information, even to leaders who are communicated to help the US technical, notify letters to internal station, and trust planes 2 to 3 some SCS and Arctic public contact with the SCS, US President Ski Shining Western at the Alice signature of the line, teaming military programs to vessels training SCS firstability of SCS plane 4 souls are in some US as leaders in Iron Center 2.34 billion testing over 9 weeks investigations 44 million channels on the North economy is good 1 Netflix 0 million is all over this and this probably is advised to come to the city to keep the enemy game 2 our trainers and to help it out it's a slippery step to know that the because of the rules the neck is making that part 3 coding and testing but multiple angles mass testing and refine version need to destroy innovation for and progressing competency force efficiency best answers and critical thinking no offense Q is knuckle because of procedural C and 1 this is is undefined unless actions to our next organization pass the TCA the United States not pass the TCA passes out the ordinance operation within intercharge forceful ratification destroys the question of the Isaac Russell overcoming the opposition Senate emergency institution how to organize opposition to create ratification and also consider theory failure of the rates and questions to confirm their treaty before that has one find message in the space Marcos has introduced the universe the European depends on China extinction for adventure what the purpose of the technical to manage market police and within her operation emphasize investigate competitiveness this at home next up lawsuits are low and decreasing Sanford report. The EEOC released a litigation period for 2024 to decrease litigation period. The 2023 reports are dismissing all claims to stop by 24 reports. Continuing reading the installed departments to treat recalls to report held the CAA. NDCA displays federal common law residency to be made. Abatement of admission sensibly blocking the litigation based on federal law and absence of federal rights to challenge admissions litigation because the state of sales. Those who are abroad response lawsuits and waiver on the evidence of defendants to try to margin litigants. Power 20 litigation reflected on the rest of the understood as any so support the measure argument the distinct was not legislative amendment. Although the district has not described litigation at any point should be very force basis. Litigation that guarantees balance in the biotech sector extinction regulation reviews diseases limited and major responsibility to energy environment and human stage on innovation biotech the next lead forward industry sector achieving energy water and food security tech will be the only way to meet demand advances in sciences and innovative solutions to global challenges building challenging first backlog global shipping quality and sufficient notice is burden progress to foster research and innovation at the extent of R&D and development laws policy laws and these targets are starting to also take years to have money otherwise noted to innovation next offer innovation obligations and all American espionage and consumer is not by the laws by saving us but it also planning by the not to benefit American espionage enable to show this itself under exemptions extinction others to go around and help that's great self over arms to support because until it sounds very well and rest until identify best privacy and terrorism before the essay project approach just rate those are better than me because instability that's something that should go back to 2047% and force where future terrorists introduce hours not to repeat half past the force the fact that they can see that accommodation can be less than legal basis and first passage that rules against oil police on the strand south west experts are high the IA 43 experts will be increase 9% 2025 experts but the US increase every year since this is budget energy export and export facilities expand export capacity by 60%. The plan choice at 1 legally accession forces compliance with part 12 of the treaty, which mandates that we end all emissions and ends the oil to right which have so sustainable cost extension entities from part 12 and treaty has substance is harmless to any good degree states regarding environments and emissions to the full extent if determined harm the oceans current environments and emission copy the and the possible from estimate elements when it's war to become mandatory multiple articles of the treaty require disclosure samples and terms and reference to come out for worse and also supplied to part 12 article 194 to states have always been environmental use of by holding other things by emission whatever sort of article 194 207 to article emissions recall party is a topical requirement airspace report. If the signal party should be level 3, if the question to its legislation passes with the treaty of signals will be breached 2. It was it mandates reduce emissions of 1.5 degrees that service the industry and also requires the parties always take all measures to limit temperature of 1.5 degrees these only just or the atmosphere that 3 lawsuits goes to any consequence no other than so it seems with the US the lawsuits on any activity regardless of peace much force to that itself against every lawsuit reason to judgments legally enforceable hard card and enforceable that destroys businesses I was 24 comprehensive the also to reduce the solid returns reduce 1.5% violence increase health costs after investor software policy statistically significant exports prevent global war between Russia China Russia constants the whole energy export in the land and defending our center ensure invaders security and concern environmental leader with 87% of actual Europe Asia absolute technology against Korea and European allies recently on the exterior South American North States did not comply with every principle of unpleasant stereo prosecuting unpleasant not every condition of the convention is ratification cannot solve China all also creation such island implementation was not policy speech with certain What's not very that all of us have, by the way, extra each intelligence solving essays for Arctic 1, FOA, that's strong navigational rights, are ingrained in Daniel Spring, L7, by CIO, US, has freedom of the seas for this management are required to grant the US navigation rights to the extent reciprocal access to navigation rights that the storage banks and American ships. 2, CIO the people is wrong, just limits to the people is one with the by the US and plus out of the world. Also the others believe Russia change of US rights or China will negotiate that access position have no impact on others. 3, policy is also wrong, BBC history, although please call all of them new evidence of impossibility we're against the INF or entirely no information. That is no material on US to believe that no one is following the decision needs not global and legal. Since China will never comply has refused to accept the history recognized or implement for reference for dispute resolution is wrong. Number 14 other easy on plus reduce volumes over claims results stress that is what I want is not almost partnership this involves jewelry rules and so on effects. Scotland and other treaties solve implementation as well. There's some evidence concludes that China will never comply with the treaty interpreted reference to says quote China respecting international law it will not be disputed in person which is non compliance. It's not no SCS for those 25 years and supporting the SCS China to see access to resolve the dispute. You want to use police and capacity and in publication there's a ceiling of publication of the for instance this Vietnam in the Philippines and Malaysia until the streets dialogue and state by single report. Also, intended also for the chronic answers, we decided to see what situations and prevent helping the Beijing big as Georgia about World War Plan Council Marshall, which was above in his health. It's not taking the result of stories. Troubles and presented and view accents not as Beijing said from 1426 to 1985 a single case. Russia will comply with the treaty rankings by coordination of us. It's actually reluctant to ensure that the princess no longer believes words Arctic lost to Russia and no Arctic war. This is an open no Arctic war no Convention Congress no activist interest. And as they most people about Reagan communication on that. Here is also presented underlying cooperation. Also non-nuclear resolving is in this calculated recycling conventional force stories while anyone launches the nuclear weapon. Impacts for Arctic sunshine has had one limits. Irish decades, no impacts in 1940s has all over. Tourist priorities are used for developing those several production companies. In several Washington was 61 the French represents less than 5% market, but cycle processing is not all the number one US. Less than the data machine research varies to general processing. Gilbert agrees into preference and they said Alan Soap and process other countries also that impact. International reversible, but that are dependent and as well as Canada, Australia, and the US unprocessed version. Asking countries, I think the best one is located in the EEZs of the US Army today. So I say the ratings and that part is that US depends on Taiwan, not China, into the preference of no miscalculated war. Absolutely, yeah.
Really hitting through arguments like base that, just ponder. Yeah, I guess so. Okay, great. I want to talk about the status of the conference. Can you keep points? No. Okay, great. I want to talk about the lawsuits to said. You said that the plan is bad for climate litigation. That's what the Brower evidence is about. The rate evidence is about how biotech lawsuits in the biotech sector is bad. What is the connection between the plan causing more climate legislation and how does that affect the biotech sector?
So, two things. First is that they would be burdened to court. You are free to evidence. You are free to read evidence that disagrees with the bottom of the rate evidence is that issues are cross issues sections straight off. So even if the plan only spikes lawsuits in a certain sector, we read evidence that would spill over because judges are so busy trying to deal with all of it.
So what types of lawsuits are important in the biotech sector?
All of our evidence says things like patents and things that also secure innovation. It also lists things like generally other products. I think it says things like notice and comment as well as other titles.
That's great. You skipped the counter.
Yeah.
The maritime espionage counterplan UNCLOS only restricts using intelligence in territorial seas, which is 12 nautical miles from the coast. This albino evidence is just about the existence of being able to use maritime intelligence. Why is not being able to use maritime intelligence in every other instance and not just the 12 nautical miles from the sea important for broader capabilities?
I mean, that begs the question of what maritime intelligence is good for. Obviously, you said that there are multiple hotspots in the US that the US needs to monitor. The albino evidence is about those hotspots and says that any of them can escalate. If the plan bans like us from doing maritime espionage just around like China, around Russia, obviously that is what matters because no one cares what a Chinese naval ship is doing in the open seas. They care what incursions are happening, things like around the Taiwan Strait, around the NSR, which means that those areas and the places where the plan bans maritime espionage, those areas are important.
Okay, great. The advantage counterplan, a covert NFU. How does that work if Russia and China don't even know that we've adopted an NFU because it's covert?
You said one of the scenario. Well, two things. One, it wouldn't go nuclear. Russia strikes us, we don't do it. Two,
That's second strike. That's not first use. If Russia strikes us first, we can strike back because it's second strike.
Okay, US did not do it themselves, so, we've heard evidence that China and Russia, neither of them are going to escalate any of the conflicts you cited. So the only risk is like miscalculation, which, so US would never first strike under any circumstance.
You said in one AC cross-X that we have hotlines now. What does the counterplan to that is distinct from the status quo, or why is the counterplan?
You are
Hotlines are going now.
We have hotlines now, it just takes out the points dispute versus the internal one. I also don't know in that case how the plan solves arguments about foreign diplomacy, because you said the reason why you would increase diplomacy is for communication. So increased dialogue, the hotlines are obviously best. Okay.
I have. And the parts of the litigation. Thing is the same. The losses.
Yeah.
Did not. The document sent, the orders can be case. The advantage power plan. The oil disad. The litigation disad. The espionage disad. Then the, that's.
The plan solves eroding maritime north to continue to see the table with us one overcome revisions legal and federal so that shaking the law over time. Now it solves the Arctic scenario. Only scenario I'm going for, but allows every party to finance the plans via the TLCS and the US defendant ETA's claim that is overlapping with Canada, Russia, and prevents complete Russian dominance of the NSR, which quote funds or war machine, which escalates to global nuclear war. Our ECS capability credibility and the lack of capacity, capability, or credibility absent that Russia will paint the U.S. as provisions which takes out all their offense. No entities board takes out the maritime intelligence impact because that's what their evidence is about. But European is one root cause is Russian hypocrisy. The reason why they're not listening to the claims is in the status quo because they think that the U.S. is not following the treaty either. Two, it doesn't achieve pressure into compliance, which is a draw bold deal evidence that says that we can pressure them and they empirically fear lawsuits and getting out of the way. And it is Russia's turn and interest to finalize claims in the first place. They say the chief resolution fails, but this is not our argument. It's about over-reliance on military force, not finalizing claims to space or raid for countries to fight over them physically. No Arctic War is wrong one. Yes, impact use may goes from this month that this conflict has the right potential. Since the Ukraine is more likely for escalation. Two, they're absent assuming the unique risk of miscalculation because of competing claim. Three, also do not assume that Russia will claim the entire NSR after ratification means that they're able to fund their war machine elsewhere. Hotlines not tell our offense because it's about competing claims and a inevitable race to state the blood. It makes no. Do that happen to any combo place or permit that any combo place hotlines fail route 20. There's high circular effects in little peer about the motion for relation already have hotlines related to the conflicts there's risk control their little political institutional obstacles including repeated answer to answer and failure to answer in crisis situation. Cut that situation. Military presence in the status quo and is failing. You should read our evidence hard power is failing. In this Stratton article and quote cannot be used as a freedom evidence and it does not solve competing claims happening out, which is what our channel like is covert doesn't work if it's not in declaration and especially if it's Russia first strike and Russia doesn't even know that we issued the NFU to go to the first place and no NFU credibility more from you. And if you would not tell accessibility adversaries who are unlikely to be reassured, cut that reassured the oil to set. Prior to the app and any claims uniqueness counterplans are bad because they're allowed them to feel out of any straight churches means the negative the app can functionally not win any offense in any time crunch 1 yard, which is voting issue 2 for every other party thoughts and disproves 3. Best find for uniqueness for LNG people impact towards about oil 4 the IRA and Biden EPA thoughts biggest child legislation to trigger 4 drop only unconscious research protection no legal link every provision is consistent with US domestic law 5 illustrates not binding conflict 4 illustrates not binding strong political will is required need for concrete action the lawsuits link is 0 more 20. Gross that the U.S. makes first environmental losses to usually overstep the loss of pollution standards and only be adopted consent of the U.S. standard having expressly adopted or not exist on the grounds of the U.S. and make it the hard stat that time overseeing and Article 298 would stop environmental regulation for 15. Article 298 is to pursue uncles preventing and the U.S. adopting initial environmental regulations. Litigation 1. No link between climate lawsuits and R&D. This was 0. Lawsuits have been high for 8 years. 4. 3 from 2. Lawsuits issued 2017 financial benefits conversation municipal governments received report away by companies law applicants and report under state laws less favorable countries with parent can too much percent Republican commissioner oil companies difficult oil companies make doing business more difficult and uncles is better for the biotech industry PB 14. Uncles percent MSR corresponds well with IPR biotech practice increasingly common and the other half of growing commercial shares full disclosure invention they effectively freely practice caused by everything above espionage 1 8 of 1 to only turn only plan losses to use are large by norms and ambiguities over intelligence staff and 2 no you need to provide all purposes in the status quo they don't have evidence that we don't follow intelligence person now it's not critical to deterrence our evidence the Broussard and Borsa plan would only restrict operations to the territory seas. There's no word by MDA is key, and there's no link. No. Approximate inclusion intelligence convention will not stimulate the impact of these intelligence activities not prohibited or regulated and can top that on intelligence restrictions that's finding and uncle specifically permits as espionage perhaps no should do. Espionage and uncle system was one of the state security do was not specifically prohibited showing violations in this passion overall. Opinion of expert legal advice convention does not regulate intelligence. Cut that intelligence. The tax that sits at part of the app and plan 2 framing issue in the unique evidence about the House which you only go through the Senate a complete and field sort of link match the plan is laws and plan happens immediately without any backlash field interest from the plan's ability by or in the link Republicans like has a mechanism to start foreign policy that's cold drop winners win LB21. PC gets evaluated quickly if you don't use this treasury bill momentum for your next proposal and TCJ bill to help tax manufacturing bill 113. TCJ expects non-corporate business received by tax firms that bigger cuts of payment driven up. In this long tax and high pressure capital material labor to save and reshuffle the ratio. The investment bill over 5% and over 2% is TCJ awards bill did not just aggregate investment.
Yeah, I think starting only reason for this is
Yeah. Okay, amazing. Thank you. The more.
Does it say like there's no, that lawsuit's not?
The more clear is just know like they wouldn't apply to the US. They wouldn't be exposed to environmental losses without a certain type of consent.
So under the oil design. The litigation descent. The marriage espionage descent. The tax cuts descent, and then the. Oil. Litigation, maritime espionage, tax cuts, that's good, and then it's. That's like above tax cuts. Let's see the top one. It's like, it's espionage then advantage.
It's hard sitting in the faces of the dissent disproves the fact that Russia will concede, will listen to the plan. Energy in hindsight ways they show that U.S. exports are critical to end Asian and European reliance on indigenous powers to prevent resource instability and global energy policies will destroy Iran, China, and Russia from escalating conflict. So even if you think they win 100% of the case, drop that we access multiple external actors like terrorists, Iran, and China, which are all external actors that are listed in the one evidence. So the dissent must have way on scope alone, even if they win the full weight of their offense. It turns the case. Russia's invasion of Ukraine proves that I'm not actually going to the in-laws or the litigation link, but they conceded the first two parts about the legally that says that the plan alone requires compliance with the treaty terms. Part 12 requires states to stop any activity that has the potential to harm the environment, which they drop bans, quote, any emission requirement that ends the fossil industry and forces us to transition to wind and solar overnight. This part, the yellow substance drop says the articles 192, 194, 207, 210, and 212 all mandate emissions reductions, which destroys oil exports. They've explicitly considered it, and which means that even if the in-laws decision was dividing, we've heard evidence that the text of the treaty itself must requires any emissions which they drop would directly shoot up with the oil industry. Also know the definition of become party that says that it's a topical mandate that requires compliance with every single part of the treaty, which means they cannot say no link in the dissent, especially at 100. Now, uniqueness kind of makes bad, we're not going for it. So it's a reason for definition, but they dropped net flags accessory because link uniqueness is dead on this topic. They swing the cloud with most things understanding. They've also dropped arbitrariness from the one C. It makes big harm for the apples super so to know if family so wolf and egg is making a part also of the state testing and quality of rates and that skew is never procedural speed and one said so drop the argument solves. Now other country stuff is unwarranted. They do not list a single country, so the Tory is not going to do it. But courts and activists are particularly litigation part of the US for addition to this activism has not taken place in other states because they offer pure opportunity to citizens know how the governments that follow in the treaty of the US and France will go to sue the day after I think courts will be able to throw ratifications internationally as well. But also this is the US is best for climate losses because it is involved nation with high emissions from to the US has increased now. We read uniqueness about LNG is a joke. The Murray evidence says that ratification bans quote oil and gas. I think that this is no implication now. IRA and Biden thumbs surrounded not read evidence for any of these. The IRA subsidized renewables, did not hurt fossil fuels. Also, they have listed a specific value policy, so the scope of the link outweighs because it would ban any emissions ever. And they drop that LNG and oil are emissions intensive now. They say only uncost protection. This is not dropped. It's answered by everything. Uncost legal rights for drilling. The last time misunderstand what they said. Okay, first and most importantly, what I just said provides legal protection. No explanation targets, nothing else. Winning nothing is superior to otherwise the new sources of oil. And if we get more oil, literally postman uncost prohibits any activity that could damage the ocean. So we would not be able to use that oil or export it because that would hurt the and that would hurt its certainty is wrong. We're already drilling the East established whole claim companies that certainty reality. And within the 20 cents of any global sense, 017 companies submitted to the US legislation, and this is the goes on to the US does not need international oil, gas, and trade without sufficient implementation right of services for certainty necessary for hydrocarbons. The line about the environmental protection being consistent says it's consistent with quote US environmental protection programs, which is our point because it disproves forces over regulation of pollution emissions. It was decision combining and losses like zero again does not matter because they conceded the treaty text itself mandates the end of the US oil industry. Article 298 prevents regulation is wrong. One, every link proves article other more articles of the treaty say we do have to regulate emissions by reducing oil use. Two, it is not responsive. It says we do not need to adopt quote additional environmental regulations and treaties that we have expressly rejected. The link is not about abiding by other environmental treaties, but rather what environmental prohibitions and the UNCLOS treaty are sufficient to destroy the industry. Now the nation. They dropped that lawsuits are all court. The lawsuits are all being dismissed now, but evidence in the federal courts are dismissing all class suits now because they don't have enough standing. Then there's no straight term because the currently registered UNCLOS is good for IP protection, but the ones the evidence is other things like trial and notice as well as patent trademarks matter more, which means that the plan cannot straight term this and drop that lawsuits are low now, so it cannot be a straight term. Now the American Espionage Act. Not going for it either, but the plan is not solve the impact because there's no reason giving the US leverage and UNCLOS means we suddenly increase intelligence operations, and there's no uniqueness because they dropped the espionage operations are advantage. Concealed purchase and test of competition theory is the reason for that argument not this year and everything was answered above. Text us. CCCJ fails to help manufacturing, which means there's no offense. Now the credibility advantage, there's no Arctic War wave evidence from 2024 as well that cites robust simulation. So even if they have a part from this month that's read by a random journalist or evidence is the most robust simulation show, the attendance of those present in rank table and countries are cooperating and adhering to international treaties, and no one is interested in escalating costs. That's a basic evidence. Now finalized claims to the CLC is wrong. They dropped the NAVIC evidence. All remember, one state explicitly said all of the SCS defense parts they entered the intelligence also apply to Russia. They dropped the NAVIC evidence and statistically that all studies agree that quote neither uses nor UNCLOS member states reduces militarized speeds. You should preserve for numbers of the random assertions of journalists because even if they get to file claims post plan or evidence statistically that is not solved by boundary disputes, the total disputes are functionally inevitable. French Russian dominance is wrong, but restoration evidence oil is more key to Russia's economy, which is the drop one C and total link evidence. Russia paid the US submission has zero impact. Now extended blanket evidence here. Ratification solves nothing. It says official statement and more way. Russia has publicly denounced UNCLOS and proven himself and said that quote we will not quote continue to be part of it if efforts are interest. They dropped also the line from the pain evidence that was also essay started that says the country's biggest interests based on strategic needs, not into difference the US to global demand. Now hypocrisy is wrong. They dropped the card, the pain evidence again from the essay standard that says that even if US hypocrisy is their current justification, they would just find another reason post plan and security people. And they found that the US fully complies with the INF and other cities where Russia and China have been in quote open violations for decades. To prove that they will just find a new reason, also dropping the thesis of revisionist on the dissent proves they cannot betray them. We can pressure them into compliance is wrong because lawsuits don't work in Russia because it's a totalitarian government and there's no reason why the US would assume Russia post-pandemic is such that makes conflict more likely. The shameful evidence is Ukraine will likely escalate strong because it means that Russia is locked down and they don't want to start new wars. But they drop every reason why miscalculated war is wrong. Why the responses will be tailored with there's no nuclear escalation.
2:24. What if we paste and the oil today, or the energy? Every year.
The taking application for Russia means that they will strike first, employ all their nuclear weapons, draw from every great power like China, and purchase countries to go nuclear. That's clear. And if that's clear, only the plan solves allows the US to check back against Russian aggression and through having a seat at the table and uncles and being able to defend competing claims and finalize them through the CLTS, which is what the biggest driver towards war is now. That's a golden deal and Friedman Evans. You should read it after the ground. It is excellent and far better than whatever one see Evans say read now. The sheer magnitude of Russian war outweighs a combined total of 10,000 units between the US and Russia, makes it prime for escalation time for outweighs proves all their offense because extinction only happens once. And we have read that Yushmenko evidence that says that escalation is happening in the status quo because that the region is quote ripe for the scope for conflict is ginormous now, and our evidence is from this month that towards our offense Russia's economy is low now, and up to uncles they will be able to claim that SR and finally a new war project only that happens in the world of the affirmative and it draws in every other country, and will just prove the thesis of the just below, which means Turk's case arguments are irrelevant. Look, prepare for the debate. If you do not understand arguments in the initial speech, then you should not vote on them, and you cannot vote negative. Independently, the two in our slate can be good, but all of their cards are de-highlighted to say two words. So so you should prefer a robust one to see evidence that defends the case. The first argument was no RT4, but one empirically dropped. Even if robust simulations are happening now, it doesn't assume because our evidence is from 2025, and since the simulations are obviously wrong because Russia is escalating the status quo and independently just assume the unique risk for miscalculation because countries will have to try and stay the line in order to because they have to decide who gets access and what to the ECS claim through the military force rather than dispute resolution and through the CLTF. They say that tensions are unstable now, but they've dropped their evidence far newer. They say that finalizing plans failed, but this is wrong. They didn't read this part in the 1C and it doesn't reduce claims because it's not specific to the CLTS or the Arctic, and it does solve boundaries because finalizing plans is what prevents miscalculation to reward just moderate precious oil. This to the county. I'll explain that below. And ratification does solve something. They dropped the Barakina evidence that the gold deal evidence to put pressures Russian hypocrisy and then took pressures Russia into compliance with Andrew said about the lawsuits. The dissent is zero. Answer will answer turns case through the link. Because if the link is low, then it means that there's no impact to the dissent to turn the affirmative. But first is the link turn. Only ratification allows to secure resources over oil, natural gas, and minerals provision. That's full. Every single company is pro oil, and they have no cards to answer this. They also dropped that every single environmental provision that the U.S. would be forced to be adopt or be bound by as per their link expedition is consistent with current U.S. provisions. Proves that it will not end the fossil fuel industry because the regulations that will force adaptation for the U.S. are already happening now. That was the quote evidence just dropped. Next, the more evidence they messed up. This is 100% defect to the link that they're going for. They didn't go for lawsuits, so you shouldn't extend it for them. But the more evidence says that quote pollution standards are only binding with the consent of the U.S. and no such standards exist, which proves that this was just dropped. The universe proves that there's no pollution standards that could actually be applied to the U.S. or be able to extend it. Interesting because it only happened with the consent of the U.S., which happened under the affirmative, which proves that there's definitely no impact to the dissent because pollution provisions will not actually exist in the first place because one, the U.S. is already following them, and two, it requires the consent of the U.S. because they've dropped the more evidence that explicitly says that.